The night was unusually quiet at the New Mexico Radio Observatory. Dr. James Miller sat in his worn office chair, his coffee long since gone cold. The screens in front of him showed the usual patterns of cosmic background radiation, until they didn't. At first, he thought he had made a mistake. The pattern that appeared on his monitor was too regular, too precise. Radio signals from space were usually messy, full of random noise and interference. But this one was different. It was clean, structured, and definitely artificial. "Hey, Tom," he called out to his assistant, who was dozing in the break room. "Come take a look at this." Tom walked over, rubbing sleep from his eyes. The moment he saw the screen, all traces of tiredness vanished from his face. "That's not natural," he whispered. "No," James agreed, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "And it's not one of ours either. I've checked every satellite database we have access to. This is coming from deep space, specifically from the direction of the Arcturus system." The signal continued to stream in, growing stronger with each passing minute. James began running it through the observatory's analysis programs. As the computers worked, more patterns emerged. These weren't random bursts of energy. They were carrying information. Within hours, the observatory was buzzing with activity. Other stations around the world had picked up the signal too. Scientists from every major space agency were connecting to their systems, all trying to decode the message hidden within the transmission. It took 3 days of non-stop work before they cracked it. The message was encoded in a surprisingly simple mathematical language, using prime numbers as its base. When they finally decoded it, James wished they hadn't. The message began with a series of images, crystal-clear pictures of various worlds. Thousands of them, all part of something called the Galactic Empire. The images showed massive cities spanning entire continents, fleets of ships that could darken stars, and technology that made humanity's greatest achievements look like children's toys. But it was the last set of images that made James's blood run cold. They showed planets before and after the Empire's arrival. Some had surrendered peacefully and were now thriving members of the Empire. Others had resisted. Those worlds were now nothing but barren rocks floating in space. The final part of the message was direct. Earth had been noticed. The Empire was expanding, and our solar system lay within their claimed territory. They expected Earth's submission within one galactic cycle, roughly 30 Earth days. "They're not even trying to hide their intentions," Tom said, his voice shaking. "This isn't first contact. This is a warning." James nodded, staring at the screens. Something about this felt wrong. Not just the threat. That was obviously wrong, but something else. The Empire had sent this message with technology that Earth should have detected long ago. It was almost as if they wanted to be noticed now, at this specific moment. As government officials and military personnel began flooding into the observatory, James noticed something odd. None of them seemed surprised. Concerned, yes. Busy, definitely. But not surprised. When a group of men in dark suits arrived and began setting up their own equipment, James watched them carefully. One of them, an older man with steel gray hair, caught him staring. Instead of looking away, the man walked over to James's station. His badge identified him as Admiral Robert Kane. "Dr. Miller," Kane said quietly, "your discovery has set certain things in motion. Things we've been preparing for longer than you've been alive." He handed James a folder with a simple black cover. "Your country needs you. The whole world does. Read this, and then decide if you want to know how deep this rabbit hole really goes." James opened the folder. On the first page, in bold letters, were 2 words that would change his life forever. Project Guardian. The night sky outside seemed darker now, but James couldn't help wondering, were we really the ones being watched, or had humanity been doing the watching all along? The underground facility beneath the Antarctic ice was nothing like James had imagined. Instead of a cramped military bunker, he found himself in a vast complex that seemed to stretch for miles. The walls gleamed with a strange metallic sheen that he'd never seen before, and every few steps there were doors leading to laboratories, filled with technology that shouldn't exist. Admiral Kane led him through the maze of corridors. "We've been expecting them for decades," he explained. "The Empire isn't as subtle as they think they are. We detected their probe ships years ago." They entered a large circular room filled with screens and holographic displays. Scientists and military personnel worked at various stations, monitoring data streams that James could barely understand. In the center of the room stood a large table displaying a 3D map of the galaxy. "Watch this," Kane said, pressing a button on the table's control panel. The room darkened, and a new transmission began playing on the main screen. The image showed a tall, humanoid figure dressed in ornate armor. Its skin had a metallic sheen, similar to the walls of the facility, but darker and more reflective. "People of Earth," the figure spoke in perfect English. "I am Commander Stone of the Galactic Empire's expansion fleet. Your world has been chosen for integration into our civilization." Images began floating around the commander, showing massive cities that stretched into the clouds, ships that could swallow Earth's moon whole, and weapons that could reshape planets. "We are not cruel masters," Stone continued. "Those who join us willingly prosper. Look at these worlds." New images appeared, showing alien civilizations working alongside Empire citizens, their planets transformed into seeming paradises. They chose wisdom over pride. The commander's expression hardened. "But those who resist." The images changed again, showing barren worlds and shattered moons. "The choice is yours. You have one galactic cycle to prepare your leaders for the Integration Summit. Coordinates will follow." The transmission ended, leaving the room in silence. "They always do this," a woman's voice said from behind them. James turned to see a tall, stern-looking woman in a military uniform. Her badge identified her as Director Anna Wells. "Show them the carrot. Show them the stick," she continued, walking to the central table. "They've done it to 100 worlds before us, but they've never encountered anything like Project Guardian." James looked between Kane and Wells. "What exactly is Project Guardian? And why am I here?" Kane smiled. "Because you're the public face of Discovery, Dr. Miller. The world knows you as the man who received their message. What they don't know is that we've been reading their mail for years." Wells pressed several buttons on the table, and new images appeared. They showed Empire ships, but from angles that could only have been taken by cloaked observation devices. "We've had probes following their fleet for decades. We know their capabilities, their weaknesses, and most importantly, their limits." "But how?" James asked. "This technology, it's beyond anything we should have." Kane's expression turned serious. "Tell me, Doctor, what do you know about the ruins we found on Mars in 2025? James blinked. "Ruins? There aren't any ruins on Mars." "Exactly," Wells said. "As far as the public knows, Mars is a dead world. But 20 years ago, we found something there. Something that changed everything we thought we knew about our place in the universe." Kane walked to a nearby wall and pressed his hand against it. The strange metal rippled under his touch. This isn't human technology. And it's not Empire technology either. It's from something far older, far more advanced than either of us." "And now," Wells added, "it's time to show the Empire that they're not the only ones who can make threats. Dr. Miller, we're going to need your help to craft our response. One warning, that's all they get." James looked at the galactic map, where the Empire's territory glowed in threatening red. "What are you planning to show them?" Kane's smile returned, but there was nothing friendly about it now. "We're going to show them why the civilization that built those ruins chose to hide their greatest achievements on a seemingly dead world, right next to an apparently primitive species." The implications made James's head spin. Humanity wasn't the prey in this scenario. We were the guardians of something far more dangerous than the Empire could imagine. The elevator descended deeper beneath the Antarctic ice. James watched the depth counter tick past numbers that seemed impossible. Next to him, Director Wells studied something on her tablet, while Admiral Kane stood silently, hands clasped behind his back. "How deep does this go?" James finally asked. "Deep enough to hide what we found on Mars," Kane replied. The elevator slowed to a stop. And speaking of Mars, the doors opened to reveal something that made James forget how to breathe. They stood in a vast chamber, larger than any stadium he'd ever seen. In the center, suspended in a web of strange, silvery supports, hung a massive spacecraft. But it wasn't like any spacecraft James had ever seen. It didn't have the brutal, functional design of the Empire's ships, nor did it match any human aesthetic. The ship was elegant, almost alive-looking, its hull flowing like liquid metal frozen in time. "We found it buried in Valles Marineris," Wells explained, walking toward an observation platform, along with a library of technical data that took us 15 years just to begin understanding. The civilization that built this, they were far beyond even what the Empire has achieved. James followed them onto the platform, which began moving toward the ship. Why didn't they stop the Empire themselves? Kane shook his head. They're long gone, transcended to another plane of existence, according to their records. But they left this behind as a gift, or maybe a test, for whoever found it first. As they got closer, James could see people working on and around the ship, scientists in lab coats, engineers in protective suits, all moving with purpose. "What we found on Mars wasn't just technology," Wells continued. "It was a warning. The Empire isn't the first civilization to try building a galactic government through force. They're just the latest in a long line of species who never learned the right lesson." The platform stopped near the ship's hull. Up close, James could see patterns in the metal, complex designs that seemed to shift and move when he wasn't looking directly at them. "Look here," Kane said, pointing to a section of the hull. "Touch it." Hesitantly, James placed his hand against the surface. It was warm, and he could have sworn he felt a slight vibration, like a purr from a massive cat. "It's alive?" he asked in amazement. "In a way," Wells answered. "The whole ship is one giant quantum computer, far more advanced than anything humanity or the Empire has created. It thinks, it learns, and it's been teaching us." Kane gestured to the various workstations around them. "Everything you see in this facility, the walls, the tools, even the lights, it's all based on what we learned from this ship. We've barely scratched the surface of what it can do, but what we have learned is enough." "Enough for what?" James asked, though he was beginning to understand. "Enough to show the Empire why they should have looked more carefully before making threats," Wells said. "The civilization that built this ship, they called themselves the Guardians. They didn't fight their enemies. They simply showed them how outmatched they were, and then offered them a choice: learn to coexist, or stay away." James looked up at the massive ship. "And now we're going to do the same thing." "Exactly," Kane nodded. "But first, we need your help. The world knows you as the person who received their message. Now you're going to help us send one back." "What kind of message?" Wells smiled, and for the first time, it reached her eyes. "A demonstration. Something small, but significant enough to make them reconsider their position. We're going to show them what happens when they threaten a world that the Guardians chose to protect." James looked between them. "Why did they choose us? Why Earth?" Kane's expression turned thoughtful. "The record suggests they saw something in humanity that they recognized. A balance of curiosity and caution, of ambition and restraint. They could have given this technology to any species, but they chose to hide it here, waiting for us to grow enough to find it. And now," Wells added, "it's time to show the Empire exactly what that trust has led to." The ship loomed above them, silent but somehow expectant, like a sleeping giant about to wake. James realized that humanity's response to the Empire would change everything, not just for Earth, but for the entire galaxy. The broadcast room was smaller than James had expected, just a simple space with black walls that seemed to absorb light. Admiral Kane stood in the center, wearing his full military uniform, medals gleaming under the bright lights. Behind the cameras, Director Wells made final adjustments to the transmission settings. "Remember," Wells said, looking up from her console, "their systems will try to trace this broadcast. They need to think it's coming from the New Mexico Observatory." James watched from behind the main control panel. The technology they were using was far beyond anything he'd seen at his observatory, yet it would make their transmission look like it came from standard Earth equipment. Another gift from the Guardian ship, he supposed. "All set," Wells announced. "Broadcasting in 3, 2, 1. Kane stood straight, his expression stern but calm. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. "To Commander Stone and the Galactic Empire's expansion fleet," he began. "I am Admiral Robert Kane of Earth's Defense Council. We have received your message regarding integration into your empire. Our response is simple: no." James watched the power readings spike as hidden transmitters activated, ensuring the message would reach every Empire ship in the sector. "You believe you are dealing with a primitive species," Kane continued. "You are not. You believe Earth is defenseless. It is not. We have watched your expansion for decades, observed your tactics, and measured your capabilities. We stayed hidden for a reason." On a secondary screen, James could see the message being broadcast in multiple formats, including the Empire's own military frequencies they thought were secure. "Look at your communication systems," Kane said. "Notice how we're broadcasting on channels you thought were unbreakable. This is not a negotiation. This is not a plea for mercy. This is your only warning." Wells nodded approvingly as she monitored the transmission. Empire communications were lighting up with confused and alarmed messages. "We have enclosed coordinates to a location in the Kuiper Belt. Send your observers there in 3 Earth days. What you see will help you make an informed decision about your next actions regarding Earth." Kane's expression hardened slightly. "One final note: we have observed your kind before. The galaxy is littered with the remains of empires that thought military might was the peak of advancement. It is not. Earth is not for taking. Remember that." The transmission cut off. For a moment, the room was silent except for the hum of equipment. "They're going crazy out there," Wells said, monitoring the Empire's communications. "Multiple ships are changing course. Looks like they're calling in reinforcements." "Good," Kane nodded. "The more witnesses, the better." He turned to James. "Dr. Miller, are you ready for Phase 2? James looked down at the tablet in his hands, displaying the technical specifications for what they planned to do. The mathematics involved were beyond anything he'd ever seen, yet somehow they made perfect sense. "You're going to destroy one of their ships?" he asked, still studying the numbers. "No," Wells corrected him. "We're going to give them a choice, the same choice the Guardians gave to others long ago. The beacon we're placing at those coordinates, it's more than just a weapon." Kane walked over to a wall display, showing the massive Guardian ship below them. "That ship didn't just teach us about technology, Doctor. It taught us about responsibility. Power without wisdom is just another form of violence. The beacon," Wells explained, "will show them 2 things. First, that we could destroy them if we wanted to. Second, that we're choosing not to. The Guardians believe that true strength lies in the ability to show mercy." James looked up from the tablet. "And if they don't understand the message?" Kane's expression was grim. "Then we show them why the Guardians chose Earth as their legacy's hiding place. But first, we give them the chance to be wiser than those who came before." Through the facility's sensors, they could already detect Empire ships moving toward the coordinates. In 3 days, the galaxy's balance of power would shift forever, hopefully toward peace, but ready for war if necessary. The warning had been given. Now they would see if the Empire was wise enough to heed it. 3 days passed quickly in the Antarctic facility. James spent most of that time studying the beacon they would use for the demonstration. It was surprisingly small, about the size of a car, its surface covered in the same flowing patterns he'd seen on the Guardian ship. "Don't let its size fool you," Wells said as they watched the final preparations. "What's inside that beacon represents technologies the Empire hasn't even dreamed of yet." The tracking screen showed dozens of Empire ships gathering at the coordinates they'd provided. Some were massive battleships, while others were smaller observation vessels. They had taken the bait. Admiral Kane entered the control room, his uniform crisp as ever. "Status report. 27 Empire ships in position," Wells replied. "They're scanning the beacon, just as we predicted. Their sensors can't penetrate its outer shell." James watched the screens intently. The beacon floated near a small, uninhabited moon in the Kuiper Belt, far enough from any populated areas to be safe. Empire ships surrounded it in a rough sphere, their own sensors probing and scanning. "They're sending a message," one of the technicians announced. Commander Stone's face appeared on the main screen. He looked less confident than in his first transmission, but still maintained an air of authority. "Earth Defense Council," he began, "we have arrived at your coordinates as requested. Our scans detect a device of unknown origin and purpose. Explain its presence." Kane stepped forward. "Commander Stone, that device is a demonstration of what awaits any force that threatens Earth. We recommend you move your support ships back to a safe distance. Keep only your observation vessels within range." Stone's expression darkened. "You dare to give orders to the Empire?" "Not orders, Commander. Advice. You have 3 minutes to reposition your fleet. What happens next will occur with or without your cooperation." They watched as Stone consulted with someone off-screen. After a tense moment, he gave orders, and most of the larger ships began moving away from the beacon. 2 minutes, Wells announced, her hands moving across the control panel. "Beacon is responding to activation codes." James could feel his heart pounding. The mathematics he studied made it clear what they were about to do, but seeing it in practice would be something else entirely. 1 minute, Wells continued. "All systems nominal. Target zone is clear of any inhabited objects." Kane nodded. "Begin the sequence." On the screens, the beacon started to glow with a soft blue light. Empire sensors would be going crazy trying to analyze it, but they wouldn't understand what they were seeing until it was too late. 30 seconds, Wells said. "Quantum field is stabilizing." The beacon's glow intensified, and strange patterns of light began to dance around it. Several Empire ships backed away further, but 3 observation vessels stayed close, their sensors drinking in every detail. 10 seconds. 5, 3, 2, 1. The beacon flared brilliantly, and then something impossible happened. The space around it began to fold, like paper being crumpled by an invisible hand. The small moon behind it shimmered and distorted. Then, in complete silence, the moon collapsed in on itself, not with an explosion or destruction, but with an elegant precision that defied natural law. The 3 closest Empire ships, caught in the effect's outer edge, didn't explode or break apart. They simply ceased to exist, wrapped into a pocket of space-time that no longer connected to normal space. Where the moon had been, there was now only a perfectly smooth sphere of distorted space, about 100 meters in diameter. It hung there like a mirror made of liquid night, reflecting the stars around it. The remaining Empire ships recoiled, their engines flaring as they retreated to what they hoped was a safe distance. "Demonstration complete," Wells said quietly. "Quantum fold is stable and contained." On the main screen, Commander Stone's face had lost all color. When he spoke, his voice trembled slightly. What did you do?" "We removed the moon from existence," Kane replied calmly. "Not destroyed. Removed. The technology you just witnessed is primitive by our standards. It's what we consider a basic defensive measure." James watched the Empire ships on the tracking screen. They were regrouping at a safe distance, but their formations were ragged, uncoordinated, Fear had replaced their arrogance. The message had been delivered. Now they would see if the Empire was wise enough to understand it. The hours following the demonstration were tense. Empire ships maintained their distance from the quantum-fold sphere that had once been a moon, while their leaders debated their next move. In the Antarctic facility's control room, James watched as message after message poured in from the Empire's command channels. "They're scared," Wells said, monitoring the communications, "but they're also curious. Their scientists are trying to understand what they just saw." "Let them try," Kane replied. "It's time for the next phase." He turned to James. "Dr. Miller, are you ready?" James nodded. They had prepared him for this moment, helping him understand enough of the Guardian technology to explain it to the Empire in terms they would grasp. He stepped forward as they established a new communication link. This time, when Commander Stone's face appeared on the screen, the Empire officer looked different. Gone was the arrogant certainty, replaced by careful calculation. "Commander Stone," James began, "I'm Dr. James Miller, the astronomer who first detected your signal. Or rather, the one who publicly detected it." Stone's eyes narrowed. "Explain." "Earth has been watching the Empire for a long time," James continued. "We've had cloaked observation posts throughout your expansion zone for decades. We know about the 47 worlds you've conquered. We know about the 12 that resisted and were destroyed. We even know about the 3 that your ships somehow missed." The commander's expression shifted slightly. Those 3 worlds were a carefully guarded secret, an embarrassment to the Empire's supposedly perfect expansion record. "When you sent your first scout ships to our solar system 15 years ago, we were ready," James continued. "We let them see what we wanted them to see, a primitive world just beginning to reach for the stars. But that's not what we are." He gestured, and Wells transmitted a series of images to the Empire ships. They showed hidden Earth facilities around the solar system, advanced ships that had shadowed Empire fleets undetected, and technology that clearly surpassed anything the Empire possessed. "200 years ago, we found something on Mars," James explained. "The ruins of an ancient civilization, the Guardians. They didn't leave weapons or ships. They left knowledge, understanding, and most importantly, they left us a choice." More images appeared, showing the Guardian ship beneath Antarctica, though carefully edited to hide its true scale and capabilities. "The Guardians discovered something that your Empire hasn't yet realized," James continued. "True power isn't about conquest. It's about understanding the fundamental forces that shape reality itself. They learned to manipulate space, time, and matter in ways that make our demonstration look like a child's toy." Stone leaned forward. "If what you say is true, why reveal this now? Why not simply destroy our ships when we first arrived?" Kane stepped into view. "Because that's not who we are, Commander. The Guardians chose Earth for a reason. They saw in humanity something they'd seen in themselves, the capacity to wield great power with wisdom." Wells transmitted one final set of images, detailed scans of Empire ships, bases, and weapon systems. "We could have stopped your expansion years ago," she added. "Instead, we watched and waited, hoping you would learn and grow on your own. But when you threatened Earth directly, you forced our hand." Stone was silent for a long moment, studying the images. "The quantum fold technology you demonstrated, that's from these Guardians. That's their most basic breakthrough," James replied. "Something they discovered in their equivalent of Earth's Bronze Age. We've learned much more since finding their legacy." "Why are you telling us this?" Stone asked finally. "Because you need to understand the truth," Kane answered. "Earth isn't some primitive world on the edge of your empire. We're the custodians of knowledge that could either elevate your civilization to new heights or end it entirely. The choice of which path to take is now yours." The Empire commander looked at something off-screen, then back at them. When he spoke again, his voice carried a new tone, one of respect. "Perhaps," he said carefully, "it is time for the Empire to consider a different approach to galactic relations." James glanced at Kane and Wells. Their plan had worked. The Empire wasn't just backing down. They were beginning to understand just how much they had to learn. 1 month after the demonstration, James stood in a space station orbiting neutral territory between Earth and Empire space. Through the station's windows, he could see ships from both civilizations holding position at respectful distances from each other. The Empire vessels looked different now, less threatening, more diplomatic in their stance. Inside the station's main conference room, Admiral Kane and Commander Stone sat across from each other at a simple table. Director Wells stood by the window, watching both the ships outside and the meeting within. James had been invited as humanity's public face, the astronomer who discovered the Empire's message. "Your terms are interesting," Stone said, looking at the document before him. "Not what I expected." "What did you expect?" Kane asked, though his slight smile suggested he already knew. "Demands for territory, technology trading agreements, military concessions." Stone gestured at the document. "Not this." This was Earth's proposal for a new relationship between their civilizations, not as ruler and subject, not even as equals, but as teacher and student. Earth was offering to share some of the Guardian knowledge, not weapons or power sources, but fundamental understandings about the universe and their place in it. The Guardians didn't believe in hoarding knowledge, Wells said from her position by the window. "Neither do we, but knowledge without wisdom is dangerous. We're offering you a chance to learn both." Stone looked down at the document again. "The Empire Council was surprised by your counterproposal. Many expected either surrender or war. Some still argue for military action." "Even after the demonstration?" James asked. "Especially after the demonstration," Stone replied. "Such power. Many believe it's too dangerous to leave in any one civilization's hands." Kane leaned forward. "Tell me, Commander, what did your scientists make of the quantum fold technology?" "They said it should be impossible," Stone admitted. "It violates several laws of physics as we understand them." "Exactly," Kane nodded. "As you understand them. The Guardians discovered that many of our basic assumptions about reality were wrong. That's what we're offering you, not just new technology, but new ways of thinking." "And if we refuse?" Stone asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "Then we go our separate ways," Wells replied. "Earth remains off-limits to the Empire, and we continue our observation of your civilization. Perhaps in another century, you'll be ready." Stone was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice carried a hint of wonder. "You know, when we first detected Earth, our scouts reported a primitive world barely reaching for the stars. We thought we were being generous, offering integration instead of conquest." "And now?" James asked. "Now I understand why the Guardians chose Earth," Stone said. "You could have destroyed our ships at any time. Instead, you watched, you waited, and when forced to act, you chose to teach rather than punish." He picked up the document and signed it with a flourish. "The Empire accepts Earth's terms." Kane signed as well, then offered his hand in the human gesture of agreement. After a moment's hesitation, Stone took it. As they completed the formalities, James walked to the window beside Wells. Outside, the stars seemed brighter somehow. "What happens now?" he asked quietly. "Now the real work begins," Wells replied. "Teaching an empire to think differently isn't easy, but the Guardians believed it was possible, and so do we." "Do you think they're still out there somewhere?" James wondered. "The Guardians." Kane joined them at the window. "Maybe. But I think they knew what they were doing when they left their legacy on Mars. Sometimes the best teachers are the ones who step back and let their students find their own way." As if in response to his words, both Earth and Empire ships began signaling each other with light patterns, not military codes or diplomatic protocols, but simple greetings between crews curious about each other. James smiled. In trying to conquer Earth, the Empire had instead found something far more valuable, a future brighter than anything they had imagined. And humanity, in defending itself, had fulfilled its role as guardians not just of ancient knowledge, but of hope for a better galaxy. The stars continued their eternal dance, witnessing the beginning of a new chapter in galactic history, one that started with a warning but ended with a promise of something greater.